Greetings, stranger. I've always recognized that my neighborhood has been a bit on the peculiar side of the spectrum. You see, our neighborhood is built on a set of rules many might consider slightly strange to say the least. To name a few, we can't leave our homes during a half moon. Likewise, we can't cook barbecue on Wednesday. And regardless of the day of the week, always have to ask the old man on the corner how he's doing. But these are only a few rules of my relatively secluded wooded suburb. And while they may sound outlandish on paper, they keep our neighborhood quiet and safe, when they're followed to a T, that is. You might be wondering why in particular we have to follow these rules, and the answer is quite simple. We have a bit of a poltergeist problem. Well, they're officially referred to as dead men according to local lore. Their forms vary from case to case, but they constantly enforce their rules with dangerous stringency. For example, if I were to put a burger on the grill in the middle of a fine Wednesday afternoon, the nearest building to me, whether it be a shed or my home, would spontaneously burst into flames. Or better yet, if I walk past the frail old man on the corner without greeting him, I could expect half the bones in my body to spontaneously crack like glass, easily one of the more violent encounters, though it's at least somewhat survivable, as a previous neighbor unfortunately discovered. But I digress. Providing you with a rulebook isn't the point of this tale. In fact, I'd like to discuss just one rule in particular, one many of us came to call the rainy day rule. The rule itself is relatively simple. Whenever it rains, you stay inside, doors locked, windows shut. And unlike the other rules, many of us spent our entire lives here without understanding why that rule existed. Many new neighbors have come and gone, but not one of them has broken the rule, or at least, we never witnessed the result of it. The only noticeable effect of this phenomenon was observed on a single night many years back, and by none other than yours truly. Following a full day of heavy storms, I'd peeked out the window upon hearing the downpour settle down to a moderate drizzle. The sun was just going down, but there was still enough light to illuminate the landscape. Around 20 yards from my window, on the edge of the tree line, was a set of illuminated eyes. Not glowing per se, but simply what you would expect from light reflecting off the eyes of an animal. Sort of that eerie shimmer. The mainly concerning aspects were the fact that they were 5 feet off the ground, and they seemingly weren't attached to a solid body. One that was visible at least. Despite this, the raindrops were visibly splashing on something that was obviously there, but out of sight. The form was roughly human, although the lack of steady rainfall at this point made it relatively hard to tell. Before any further observations could be made, however, the rain slowly came to a stop, and with it, the figure and eyes vanished. That was the last I ever saw of that phenomenon to date. Plenty more rainy days followed, but I never saw that figure again. Because of this, however, I was even more adamant about remaining indoors whenever the clouds opened up. Now, the point of this little account wasn't to provide you with a ghost story, or a spooky tale to rattle your bones before bed. Rather, this is a warning, or in my case, something of an obituary, I suppose. The rainy days had returned, though they hadn't subsided in the usual 5 hours you might expect from a typical storm. In fact, we are currently going on day 23 of a non-stop downpour. To make matters worse, I might very well be the only one left in this neighborhood. let me try and break this particular rainy day episode down as shortly as possible. First, it began raining softly. Then, it picked up to a downpour. And then, a practical monsoon. And once it didn't stop by day 3, we began getting worried. My parents attempted to phone the neighbors and discuss the events, but the storm had made the cellular service spotty enough to make calling and texting barely worth the trouble. By day 5, the power had gone out, likely from the substation being completely waterlogged at that point. By day 14, whatever was left in the pantry was beginning to run low, and we started becoming fairly desperate. By day 15, my parents caved and chose to open the door and venture out. Hesitantly, they opened the door, equipped in full rain gear, and slowly stepped into the downpour. The neighbors, having witnessed this through open windows, and seeing they were unharmed so far, slowly began following suit. Within 10 minutes, the streets were crowded with practically the entire suburb, all donning full rain gear, with many of them beginning to nervously cheer and jump in the rain, appearing to genuinely enjoy it. In hindsight, I couldn't even blame them, since many of us had never experienced rainfall before, and seeing the pure happiness it brought my parents' faces was simultaneously the most eerie and beautiful moment I had ever witnessed. At that point, I was convinced that the apparition that I had witnessed before was simply a figment of my young imagination, and ran upstairs to grab my jacket and boots to join the crowd outside. However, when I returned downstairs, I immediately noticed how quiet it had become. I grabbed the handle to the front door, hesitantly opened it, and was greeted by what can only be described as one of the most haunting scenes I had ever witnessed. Strewn across the streets were the raincoats, boots, and clothes of everyone who had previously been cheering in the rain, as if they had simply disappeared into thin air. At the toe of my boots was the rain gear of my parents. There was nobody anywhere to be seen, and all there was to be heard was the torrential downpour overhead. Everything within me wanted to bolt into the rain and call for my parents, call for anyone. But at this point, I knew what I could expect from venturing into the storm to look for them. I slowly closed the door, trudged into my room, and proceeded to spend the next few days in what can only be described as a shock-induced haze. To make matters worse, no matter which corner of the house I ran to, a foreboding presence outside the thin brick walls followed me incessantly. I didn't have to open the curtains to know what was waiting outside. Once I returned to reality, I hooked up my phone to my mobile battery, and using the last remaining bit of power, began recording this account, hoping I wouldn't have to share it, hoping that the rain would simply stop. But as you might have guessed, I wasn't so lucky. Despite the service being spotty, I've mass shared this to practically every inbox I reasonably can before my device runs out of power. If you're fortunate enough to read this, avoid the empty suburb. For the sake of other safety, if the rain doesn't subside soon, I won't share the location. Once the storm clears, however, I'm sure our now ghost town of a neighborhood will make the news. Whatever you do, stay far away from this place. Many of the rules can be followed easily, but some can only be followed for so long. I'm going to head out and brave the storm. Whatever fate awaits me out there is certainly better than starving alone. Who knows? I might even see my family and neighbors once more, wherever they went. Regardless, thank you for listening, and goodbye, stranger.